Welcome everybody to today's third and final session as part of the Lunchtime Learning Series for National Carers Week 2023 that Carers New South Wales is leading with a policy and research focus. My name's Sarah Judd-Lamb. I'm the Executive Manager, Policy Development and Research at Carers New South Wales, and pleased to be hosting today's webinar along with my panellists, who I will introduce shortly. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that are represented in today's webinar. That's the Gorogal land that I'm presenting from today in North Sydney. But I also want to extend my respect to the lands represented by our panellists and all of our attendees today, and also to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander carers and stakeholders joining us today, particularly during what has been a challenging week for many. And just briefly, so you know where we're coming from, if you're not familiar with Carers New South Wales, we are the peak non-government organisation for carers in New South Wales. When we talk about carers, we are talking about those that are supporting a family member or friend who's living with a disability, a mental illness, a drug and alcohol dependency, a chronic condition, a terminal illness, or who's frail due to age. We are today, I mentioned a series as part of National Carers Week. We've been looking at some different topics relating to policy and research as part of this lunchtime learning series, all of which are being recorded, including this session today. And the recordings will be made available through the Carers New South Wales YouTube channel following Carers Week, and will also be distributed through our e-news, which you're invited to sign up for as well if you haven't already, and we will put that link in the chat a little later. So just briefly, in terms of setting the scene, I suppose, for today's conversation. So I'd like to make sure we focus most of our time on hearing from our panellists, who I'm sure will have a lot to share about their own involvement so far and reflections on the federal inquiry into carer recognition. Some of you today might be familiar with the inquiry, might have been involved yourselves. Others might just be sort of checking in for the first time. So either way, I've just got some high-level information up here to set the scene. The inquiry is being led by the Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs, and it was referred by the Minister for Social Services, the Honourable Amanda Rishworth. The terms of reference are detailed. I didn't include all of them here, but the inquiry is really focused around the Commonwealth Carer Recognition legislation, and it's a statement for Australia's carers, but also other legislative and policy responses across Australia and overseas that focus on carer recognition. It also will look at, or has been looking at, developments in the policy landscape, and also a number of specific topics that are called out in the terms of reference around understanding the value of unpaid care, the needs of specific cohorts of carers, the role of flexible workplaces and the importance of employment participation, the role of gender equity, and also the government's broader approach to the care workforce broadly, that's paid and unpaid care workforce. So if it's your first time hearing about the inquiry, it's probably best to look at the detail online yourself. And so we've got the link there for where you can find everything about the inquiry. That's got really the detailed terms of reference, all of the public submissions and hearings. It's the one-stop shop for information and for ways that you can be involved as well. And so just a bit of a high-level update, looking at the site this morning, there's 141 submissions published so far, and that's from a whole range of organisations and networks, but also from many carers themselves as individuals. Carers New South Wales did make a submission, and that's number 94 if you would like to download that and have a look. But also you'll see submissions from some faces here today as well. And there's been a number of public hearings between August and October. Carers New South Wales has been involved in 2 of those hearings. One, myself and our CEO, Elena Katrakis, were involved as part of a number of carer organisations presenting evidence. And we also had the opportunity to put forward some of our carer representatives to an earlier public hearing for the inquiry, which was a fantastic opportunity, and you will hear about that a little bit more from Alex today. I believe there's one more public hearing scheduled for next week, but as I said, if you want to catch up on any of those things, you can view transcripts of hearings, agendas of upcoming hearings, You can view and download submissions all from that web address that is on the screen. And so that's, I guess, kind of an introduction. In terms of where our panel sits today, so while it's quite progressed, this inquiry, we had two aims in wanting to bring together this event for National Carers Week. One was we know a number of carers and stakeholders that were highly involved in, or have been highly involved in the process thus far, whether through consultations with Carers New South Wales, through providing submissions, through participating in hearings. And so we actually wanted to, I guess, elevate the different ways in which you can participate in this and other inquiries as a carer or as a stakeholder interested in carers, because that's a really important avenue for systemic advocacy, particularly in a topic as important as this one. But we also thought it would be a really great opportunity to hear from some different perspectives on the actual terms of reference of the inquiry. And so we've brought together today some different people that we work with extensively who have their own reflections to share on the opportunities presented by the inquiry and on some of the priorities that they've been putting forward. So I'm very excited to present, or to introduce, I should say, to you today our panelists. And I'm not going to do detailed bios for them because they are going to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they've been involved as part of their presentation today. So without any further ado, I might go to our panelists and introduce them, or ask them to introduce themselves. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists, Alex, Myra and Kathy, to tell us a little bit about themselves, but also about how they've contributed to the inquiry so far. So I want to start with Alex, who is a Carers New South Wales carer representative, among many other things, which I'm sure he will tell you about. And Alex has been involved with us in the inquiry thus far. And Alex, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and also how you have contributed to the inquiry so far?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Sarah. And let me just start by saying I do appreciate Carers New South Wales in getting myself and other carers involved in this particular inquiry. As for myself, I look after someone in my life, a loved one who has experienced various forms of mental health challenges, including chronic suicidality and complex trauma and depression over a number of, well, coming up to 20 years actually. And my participation in this particular inquiry about care recognition came about when basically through my role as being a care representative with Carers New South Wales. And yeah, I would say that's my background. I mean, I've got professional roles elsewhere, but I do get involved a bit in care advocacy and representations, and yeah, very grateful for that, to be able to do that. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. And Myra, did you want to go next and just give us a little introduction and also touch on how you've been involved in the inquiry so far?
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Sarah? Okay, great. So I'm a researcher at the University of Sydney and have for some years been doing research on the experiences of carers and the impacts of care on different aspects of carers' lives. I have been doing some work with Carers New South Wales over the last, I guess, kind of 7 or 8 years, most recently using their survey questions about recognition to explore the things that contribute to carer recognition and the outcomes of different levels of carer recognition. So when this inquiry commenced, my colleagues and I at the University of Sydney, I'm part of a couple of research groups doing work in the area of care, decided to put in a joint submission to the inquiry. And then we were invited to come to a hearing and provide verbal evidence. So we did that too.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Myra. And lucky last, Kathy, do you want to say a hello and give us a bit of background about your involvement in the inquiry so far?
Sure, thanks. So I'm a senior lecturer in social work and researcher at the University of Wollongong. My interest in advocating for carers' rights started many years ago when I worked as an aged care assessment team social worker. I then worked in a policy position in the former Commonwealth Government Department of Health and Ageing, so worked around a lot of the policy reform related to aged care and indirectly carers. My PhD research is partnership with Carers New South Wales and an aged care provider on the South Coast, and we looked at the impact of marketising home care package services, what impact that had on family and friend carers. And we developed a framework for carer recognition and some guidelines on how we can improve the experiences of carers in receiving home care. And my submission to the current inquiry was really pulling together some of the information that went to the Aged Care Royal Commission and recommendations. And I'm also now a carer for my elderly father.
Thanks, Kathy. And great to have you all with us today. As everyone mentioned, we've worked together collaboratively on a number of different projects. So it's great to have opportunities like this that come up that are really significant opportunities to provide, evidence-based and lived experience-based feedback to policy reform. And there's been a number of those in the last few years. In fact, we did a webinar very similar to this in 2020 on the Royal Commission into aged care at that time. And there's also been some similar work happening in the last 18 months around the inquiry into carer leave as well. So there's been a lot of really exciting policy developments around carers in recent years. Just wanted to dig a little bit more into your involvement in the inquiry so far, so we can get a sense of perspective on what you've contributed. Alex, as a carer, what was it like to participate in a public hearing? And is there any advice that you would want to offer to other carers considering a similar opportunity?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. I think it was a very unique opportunity for an individual carer like myself to be given the opportunity to participate in a public hearing, especially since it's an intersection between personal advocacy and systemic advocacy, which are two different types of doing advocacy. For people who may not be familiar, systemic advocacy refers more to advocacy at a higher level that impacts upon vast populations, whereas individual advocacy is more about the person's individual circumstances. And usually, I guess, from individual carers' point of view, if we want to engage in advocacy, it usually, if we tell our story personally, it usually involves doing personal advocacy. But this public hearing gave me and the other carers who were involved a chance to actually tell our story to an inquiry that deals with systemic advocacy, which deals with the overall picture of care recognition. So that was a really unique opportunity to do that. And as I said, something that I certainly valued. And I say, in terms of my own experiences there, I found the people, both with Carers New South Wales as well as the members of Parliament who were involved, who were there to listen, to be very mindful. They were prepared to listen and were empathetic about our individual stories, which is really much appreciated. It's really good to see that mindset coming through. Finally, with what advice I would say is definitely preparation. Do think about your story, and because as carers, we all have so many stories that we can tell, and given the time constraint, it can be easy to, I guess, run overtime basically. So it would be great to think about and have a narrative of what you want to say, because time is of the essence. But also think about what's the policy area that the inquiry specifically deals with, because these inquiries, they are terms of references, and they can only deal with what's there, what's in the term of reference. So to tailor that story, to tailor what you have to say to what the terms of reference is, and that would really help bring the message across. And finally, bring your heart into it. The other witnesses in the public hearing session, they really brought their lived experience, their emotion about caring to it, and that's what really drives the story. So I absolutely do encourage other carers out there to participate, to engage with organisations like Carers New South Wales in future opportunities like these.
Thanks, Alex. That's great feedback. And Melissa has posted in the chat the recording for that session. And not to embarrass you, Alex, but you and the other carers that gave evidence at that session just did such a fantastic job of advocating for carers, bringing in lived experience, but really bringing it back to the terms of reference. And so definitely worth a watch. And there's a transcript available as that as well. But also a bit of a shameless plug that if anyone watching today is a carer that would be interested in that kind of opportunity and doesn't know where to start with it, Alex is part of our care representation program that provides training and support to participate in those kinds of opportunities. So shameless plug, and I might get Melissa to pop in the chat a bit of information about the carer rep program if anyone watching today is interested. As people that's made submissions, Myra and Kathy, I might go to you both next and just ask about your reflections on the process of providing submissions and also Myra giving evidence. So maybe starting with Myra, did you feel that you were able to raise the issues that you wanted to through your participation in the inquiry?
Yes, I really was. I mean, I always think that these kinds of inquiries are a really excellent opportunity for researchers like me and, you know, my colleagues in my group to really present our research in a very concise, specific way directly to policymakers. And I found with this inquiry in particular, the terms of reference were actually quite comprehensive and allowed the members of the committee to ask what I thought were the right questions. And so that made it possible for us to really make the points that we thought needed to be made. It doesn't always happen in inquiries. You know, sometimes the terms of reference are quite narrow. And as you know, Sarah, you know, you sort of, it's really tempting to say, actually, these are the wrong questions. You should be answering these different questions. But as Alex said, you know, the terms of reference are quite rigid, and the committee is you know, really required to focus within the confines of those terms of reference. So, you know, the terms of reference for this inquiry I thought were really good. And then when it came to providing evidence in the hearing, I found that the MPs involved in the committee were really engaged and curious about the area, had read our submission clearly, like in quite a detailed way, and had really great questions, not just about the kind of principles we're talking about, but the nuts and bolts of what might help. So it was a really positive experience in terms of having an opportunity to draw on some of our research findings and make some suggestions about what could contribute in a positive way to reform.
That's great. Thanks, Myra. And I know Myra was at a public hearing that was followed ours, and there's transcripts and I think recordings available on that. But also I think Mel's posted the links to the submissions there too. And Kathy, what about you? How did you find the inquiry process for elevating your work on care recognition?
Look, I agree with Alex and Myra. I think the questions, the terms of reference are really spot on. I think they really are looking at not just doing a tokenistic effort here and trying to work out how to actually make sure that the Care Recognition Act does actually have some power, does actually have some teeth. So it was really clear from my research with carers of older people who are receiving the home care services, one of the major missing links in community aged care policy is that there's no acknowledgement of responsibilities of aged care providers to family and friend carers under the current Care Recognition Act. We moved to individualised program funding, like it's happened in home care programs and NDIS. Those have resulted in carers reporting they feel silenced and ignored. So I think, you know, the current inquiry is about genuinely providing a voice. I think they're also looking at moving away from the Act being just about recognition and more about rights, which is really important. You know, I think it's a really great opportunity to align carer rights in the context of aged care reform moving forward. So I'm really excited about it.
That's great. Thank you, Kathy. And something I forgot to mention earlier around our panelists as well. So they're bringing different perspectives in terms of how they've participated in the inquiry. also in the roles that they've participated in the inquiry in, but also around the sectors that they represent. So Kathy's work is really focused on sort of aged care settings. Myra has done some work there as well, but it's also looks a lot at employment and gender. And Alex is obviously speaking from the mental health care perspective. So I think something great about this opportunity too is that it looks at carers across the board. So there's lots of opportunities to provide feedback. So one of the things I wanted to start by putting it out to all of you around the content of the inquiry, something that I know Carers New South Wales is hearing evidence and submission focused on quite a lot was around the questions the committee had about the definition of carer. So I just wondered whether anyone wanted to make a reflection about their perspective on the definition of carer. And I wanted to start with Kathy. Did you have any thoughts about that?
I think even going back a step, before we talk about a carer, we need to talk about what is care, and remember that care occurs within established relationships. It's not an individual thing, and it's always relational. Care isn't just a feeling; it's also involves hard and messy work. And so carers are engaged in a relational act of providing, hard and messy work to someone they love. And I really like the way Alex was saying that the carers at the hearing were reinforcing the emotional aspect of carer recognition. Caring have traditionally been perceived in Western society as belonging to the private domain, as being devalued and hidden. And I see that that's one of the problems with, what's happened in the aged care sector. So again, I just think it's really important that the terms of reference and within the actual act, we're looking at what is care and acknowledging it is a relational and very personal performing of work.
Thanks, Kathy. And Myra, Alex, did you have any reflections on definitions of care or carer in this context? Myra, did you want to jump in?
Sure. I think there are a number of ways that definition of a carer could be expanded within the Act. The one we chose to focus on in the submission that we made to this inquiry was based on some work that's been done by Alex Heron, a colleague of mine. And it's about the use of the phrase frail and aged. And she's done a lot of work on the way in which care of an older person often commences well before the onset of frailty. And so we suggested in our submission that the phrasing be changed so that it's more encompassing of care of an older person in a variety of ways that doesn't necessarily involve frailty.
That's great. Thanks, Myra. There's just so much depth around a lot of the language that's used in the Act. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about how we use the words well to ensure that carers are recognised. Alex, did you want to add anything to the definition conversation?
Yes, thank you. Funny enough, I actually just came from a carers event, this being National Carers Week. I just came from an event where several carers there talked about how they don't resonate with the word carer, especially in a culturally and linguistically diverse context. And from my own personal experience, for the longest time, I didn't see myself as a carer, despite taking on that role for about 20 years, mainly because I just thought that, yep, I am my person's I'm related to that person, they're my loved one, so I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. And it's a bit similar to what Kathy was saying before, that caring is relational. It's about relationship. So to me personally, it might have hindered recognition for people to have to think about, oh, am I actually a carer? I'm actually personally involved in a project about having a conversation with carers out there about what they feel about that particular word, because even though the legislation does talk about it, but it can get a little bit nebulous. So, and certainly look forward to hearing more from other panelists and participants today about how they feel about it.
Thanks for that, Alex. And yeah, the term carer and whether it's the right term is something that I think is an ongoing discussion in many different contexts. Probably something we can't solve today, but It's definitely part of the discussion that I know the committee's been looking at. In terms of, I guess, concepts or terminology, I know this is all very technical, but in a practical sense, this inquiry is focused on recognition for carers and looking at how do we go from principles of recognition to actually doing recognition and carers being recognised. And I think it's important to think about what do we actually mean when we're talking about recognition? And that might be look different in different settings. So I wanted to start with you, Kathy, and just ask, what do you think recognition should look like in the aged care setting for carers?
So like care, recognition is often reduced to a minimalist definition, and it can just be seen as sort of, having carers week and put a big pat on the back. That's nice, carers, you're doing a great job. But it's, for decades, political theorists have been debating what the different elements and dimensions of recognition are. It's about rights just as much as it's about acknowledgement in a cultural sense. It's also about social connectedness for carers, and it's also about addressing financial disadvantage as a result of caring. Certainly, in the home care program, what we developed in our framework was, what does that look like on the ground? What does it look like for the organisation? And what it means for the organisation is it means that they're doing things like they're involving carers in a carers needs assessment. So they're actually determining what needs the carers have, as well as the older service recipient, so that when they're planning the services, they might actually have, say, a block of time where they're providing personal care and housework, but that allows the carer to attend something they want to do on that particular day. So it's about acknowledging the carer's involvement and working with them to maximise the funding through those home care programs.
Thanks, Kathy. So you're really talking about that recognition on an individual level and in a tangible way in the service setting. That's great.
Practiced. It's embodied and practiced on a daily basis. And that's where, if that's not happening and that's not being reinforced through the way the programs are designed and administered, then it reduces the legislation just to words.
Which I'm sure you've covered in your submission in great strength and detail. Thanks, Kathy. Alex, as a mental health carer, what were the most important messages about recognition that you wanted to convey to the committee?
I think recognition as accountability and rights, as Kathy was saying, is super important, because without accountability, it's very difficult to, as the old saying goes, what gets measured gets done. So conversely, what doesn't get measured also doesn't get done. And also, if there's no accountability or responsibility or ways to, basically consequences for not following up with what is written in the legislation. Basically, it's as some people in the press might say, the legislation needs some teeth, so to speak. And interestingly enough, during the last week or so, the World Health Organization actually put out a report, or more of a recommendation, on how to enshrine rights into mental health legislation. It's of course, it's very high level. We're talking about global advocacy here, but it's good to see that the having recognition as rights, as a set of rights that with it attached accountability, it seems to be something that's growing in impetus. So it's, if I'm going to have just that one message, that would be it, having accountability.
It's great. Thanks, Alex. There's a lot of depth to this concept, I think, and I've made some notes, some really great gems that both of you have said already, which I will come back to. Myra, did you have any reflections on what recognition looks like, particularly in the context of paid work?
Yeah, so what we said at the hearing was that better recognition involves not just understanding who carers are and what they do, but it's about recognising that care first involves expertise or skills that has social value. Second, that care incurs costs and creates needs. among carers, and thirdly, that these costs should be mitigated and the needs addressed. And really that kind of framework for thinking about recognition, I suppose, could be applied to any area. And one of those areas is the workplace. So we argue that workplace rights are a really important form of recognition. The work that we're doing with the Carers New South Wales survey data at the moment, I'm doing it with my colleague Hugh Bainbridge and others, suggests that when carers have a hard time balancing their paid work and unpaid care, because they don't have access to the kinds of support in the workplace that they need, it actually leads to a lower sense of recognition. And when they have a lower sense of recognition, they then have a range of other poorer outcomes like lower well-being, a poorer sense of social connectedness. So actually work is really important in contributing to carers' sense of recognition. So some of the recommendations that we suggested, for example, were access to flexibility in workplaces, access to leave, access to supportive and understanding employers, because it doesn't matter how good your policies are in the workplace. If carers don't feel like they can use them because their employer doesn't think they should, then they won't. So really we want we're hopeful that one of the outcomes of this process is that the Act makes reference to the importance of better support for carers in the workplace, and then there are a range of stipulations about how that might take place in subsequent activities.
It's great, thank you, Myra. And the summary that I'm sort of bringing together in my head, or just some of the really key points that I've pulled out from what all three of you have said. Recognition needs to be embodied and practiced on a daily basis. Sort of paraphrasing what you said, Kathy, it needs to involve accountability, which is what Alex was talking about. And I really liked that you brought in that phrase, Alex, that what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. I think that's a really good line to lead with in terms of making sure that when the rubber hits the road, these things are implemented. And then Myra, I really liked what you said about not just giving care social value, but also acknowledging and addressing the costs. And that's something that's definitely been raised. We had a webinar as part of our Care and Knowledge Exchange project back in August, where we talked in depth about concepts of empowerment and resilience with carers. And that's one of the things that came up a lot from the carers that were involved with that, is that they don't just want recognition that what they do is good. They actually want recognition that it can be hard, and that not just recognition, but actually someone doing something about that, about the hard bits. So I think that's a really great summary of some of the many different aspects of recognition that have come out during this inquiry. So as well as this inquiry, I guess I wanted to turn to, there's been a lot of other stuff happening, which I sort of listed some of earlier in the policy space that's impacted carers. And so I guess just thinking about the different sectors that you represent, the different networks that you're in, I wanted to ask about what are some other things that have been going on that the committee needs to ensure are kept in mind as they look at the what they're going to do around recommendations on care recognition legislation, especially. So I wanted to start with you, Myra, and ask about what relevant policy developments you think need to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, the exciting thing is that there is a lot happening in this space at the moment. And so policymakers are interested in listening about what we could do differently in the area of care. Some of those things that have been going on recently are reviews of the NDIS and the Aged Care Act, the inquiry into carers leave, and the development of the national strategy on the care and support economy. And I think all of those things are linked to the inquiry into care recognition in really important ways. So, for example, our work suggests that recognition is really closely entwined with carers' experience of interacting with the disability and aged care systems. So our work's found that when carers, for example, have frustrating experiences navigating the aged care system, they have a lower sense of recognition. So we recommended in our submission that the committee looking into carer recognition have a close look at other processes taking place in the form of disability and aged care to make sure that they're all working towards the same goal, and that recognition is embedded in the disability and aged care systems. The Carers Leave Inquiry is another one. The Productivity Commission report was not strongly in favour of changes to the carer leave system. So I think there's a potential for the committee to make reference to that. I mean, the committee found, I think, the Productivity Commission inquiry, I think, found that something like around 35,000 carers of a person with a disability or an older person would potentially use a longer version of unpaid carers leave each year. But they said that that the benefits enjoyed by these carers are outweighed by the costs to employers and taxpayers. So to me, that's not a carer reading that recommendation by the Productivity Commission is not going to feel particularly recognised, probably. And so I think that there's an opportunity for this committee to really, provide some commentary on other inquiries going forward about how carers can actually be recognised appropriately, not only in reform processes, but in inquiry processes and in reporting arising from those inquiries.
Thanks, Myra. And you mentioned some of the elements that are relevant here are the service system reforms. And so I wanted to ask you, Alex, about, I know you've been involved in some of the feedback around the National Disability Insurance Scheme review. And so was there anything there that you wanted to pick up that you think is relevant to the committee's current inquiry?
Yes, I think so. I was involved with in the NDIS inquiry review with the National Mental Health Consumer and Carers Forum, or the NMHCCF. And it was done in the form of a forum, a focus group, basically, of carers just going through their experiences of interacting with the system, both in terms of application, approval process, and getting things done in the NDIS framework. I do think that carers are, even though NDIS isn't specifically targeted at carers, but they do form a key to navigating what is a really complex system, because especially in the field of psychosocial disability or mental health, and carers, people may or may not have the capability or willingness to navigate with the system themselves. So that's where carers come in. So I would say that carers have a massive role in dealing with the NDIS system and by extension the review as well. I would say what I learned from that process, what was really beneficial, was that the conversation between carers in a moderated way, so whether it be a focus group or just having that conversation where people can bounce off each other, but in a moderated way, as I said, and to go into some depth of, for example, probing it into when they say something and you want to go into more depth, actually go, what do you mean by that? How go a little bit further and analyze the themes that come out of it was really helpful. So that's what I really got out of that. But yeah, carers absolutely would play a big role in the NDIS review.
Thanks for that, Alex. And similarly, Kathy, I wanted to hear your reflections on developments in the aged care policy space and what is relevant to this current inquiry.
Sure, thanks. So Myra touched on it. So there is a review of the Aged Care Act as a result of the Aged Care Royal Commission recommendations, and also the consolidation merging of Commonwealth Home Support Program and home care packages has been stalled, which I'm really pleased about. They've been stalling it for a little while. So I hope there's opportunities for this inquiry to really genuinely feed into those processes. When I reviewed the Australian Government Department of Health submission into this inquiry, they acknowledged the important role carers play in supporting older people at home, which is good. They acknowledged the department's responsibility to provide respite services, which is good because there's a lot of money tied up in the aged care programs in planned respite. What's missing in Department of Health and Ageing submission is recognition of carers as consumers of aged care services in their own right, with a right to an assessment of carers' need. And we used to have that back in the good old days of the home and community care program. So that's a loss. Being positive, though, I can see an opportunity emerging out of the inquiry for care recognition to be firmly embedded in all care-based programs at national level, including a formal acknowledgement of carers and aged care providers' responsibilities under the Care Recognition Act in the Aged Care Act. The timing of it all will allow new home care program to reflect legislative principles of care recognition. So it's, the timing's good, and let's be positive.
Thanks, Kathy. And I think as well, if any of you are watching today or watching the recording would like to be involved more in providing feedback to these kinds of opportunities, which are many at the moment and ongoing, we included the information for the Care Rep program in the chat before, but also Melissa has posted the policy advice form that Carers New South Wales uses to collect case studies that we use in our submissions. We're always doing submissions to every possible opportunity to raise awareness of carers, and we also do maintain awareness through our monthly newsletters about these opportunities and through social media. So if you're not already connected with Carers New South Wales, that's a great way to stay up to speed about these opportunities to participate. It really is important to get those diverse perspectives. And so I wanted to then, I guess, transition into we've talked about both this inquiry and the ways that you've been involved, and also a number of other different inquiries and reviews that you've had the opportunity to provide input into. Do you think that these kinds of opportunities are reaching the right voices, and how accessible are they for the groups that you represent? So I wanted to start with Alex as our carer rep on today's panel, even though not some of us have caring responsibilities as well. How accessible was the process, or have the processes been for this inquiry and for other inquiries, and what could be improved?
I do find the process accessible insofar as myself and the fellow carers who appeared on the inquiry, we were very, very amply supported by Carers New South Wales, as well as the staff members at Federal Parliament who were running the inquiry. So in terms of actually getting there and presenting our story, it was very accessible. But like I said at the beginning, it's a rare opportunity, and it is something that Carers New South Wales has also acknowledged that it's not something that pops up every second week. I absolutely wish that there is more such opportunities coming up for carers to directly tell their story, because when carers like ourselves can directly relate our stories and tell it in the story form, I think
you might have just frozen there, Alex. Is that just for me?
can resonate grassroots level, and
You're back.
Okay, cool. Yep. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I was just saying, I saw one of the comments saying that carers, there needs to be more on a grassroots level, having a recognition that it's a community. And so having that opportunity for carers to directly relate at a parliamentary, at a governmental level, that absolutely increases that opportunity, it increases that dialogue at a grassroots level, I do believe. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Alex, and sorry about that little tech delay in the middle there. Myra and Kathy, bringing your researcher hats to this question, do you think that these kinds of inquiries, including the present inquiry, capture enough research evidence? And do you see that evidence being used to actually inform recommendations? Who would like to go first? Myra's taken herself off mute.
Look, I think that's a really difficult question. I think it's very variable. I think that often it would be of benefit if there was more research evidence contributing to these inquiries. I think that sometimes researchers don't hear about opportunities to contribute submissions to these kinds of inquiries, or they hear about it but they're very busy. Or early career researchers don't have support in, you know, or the tools to be able to make submissions to these kinds of inquiries. So I definitely think there could be more capacity building within the research community to help and encourage researchers to make the most of these opportunities to contribute research evidence to these kinds of inquiries. One thing I found to be helpful is you know, often researchers are, you know, time poor, and there've been a lot of inquiries lately, and coming together as a research group is a helpful way of sharing resources to put together a submission, but also as a way of kind of pooling research findings in a way that might carry more weight, and that might actually be kind of quicker for the committee to read if, you know, some 10 or 12 or even just a few researchers have put all of their research findings together in a summary in the one submission.
Thanks, Myra. Did you want to add anything, Kathy?
I think, again, look, I agree with Myra. There's a lot of research out there, and I'm not sure how much they've tapped into international research as well. A heck of a lot's come out of England. They've done a lot of work with their CARE Act, and it's looking pretty good. In reality, there's problems with implementing, but the CARE Act itself is good. So I don't know how broadly they've engaged with the research evidence. I remain hopeful.
Great, thanks for that. And we might now just skip to some audience questions. But one thing I did want to also comment on, and Alex raised it, was the comment in the chat around grassroots recognition, which I think is another element that we didn't draw out earlier. There's so many facets to it, and I think it's really important that it does get looked at from the top down. You have your systemic recognition, you know, in principle, you have your service level recognition, you have your day-to-day recognition in the house, you have your day-to-day recognition in the community. It is such a detailed concept, and it's really important to have all those angles. So thank you, Christine, for adding that perspective. And also, just as well, another shameless plug, we launched the full report for the 2022 National Carer Survey on Monday that Carers New South Wales leads with the support of the other state and territory carer organisations. I'm sure Mel will add that link in the chat for you, but we do a lot of analysis in that report around recognition. And we look at recognition in a whole number of domains, in recognition by governments, recognition by service providers, by communities, by family and friends. And it's really important to see that those experiences can be different, but they also really do significantly, in the statistics, impact carers' wellbeing. And so we put a lot of that evidence into our submission and into our hearing evidence. But it is just really important to have it, you know, looking at the different domains. So you can read up more on that if you'd like, in a link in the chat. But we do have a couple of other questions and comments that have come through so far. And I noticed with interest, and not surprised, that most of them are relating to finances, which, so one of the questions we had was, why were rates of payment excluded from the terms of reference? So thank you for pointing that out, Lynn. I didn't have room on my slide to note that, but explicitly the terms of reference for this inquiry said that carer payments and the adequacy of the rates of carer payments was not in scope, which was a controversial exclusion. As to the question of why was it excluded, I don't know that we can speak on behalf of the committee or the minister about that, but I imagine that because income support is sort of managed by different parts of government than those that are looking at the Recognition Act. And so I guess there are maybe other opportunities to provide feedback on that. But one thing I should point out is that we felt as Carers New South Wales, and highlighted in our submission and our hearing evidence, that financial recognition is so key, that on the understanding that, you know, Centrelink payments is a specific element that wasn't in scope, we really stressed that our evidence shows that financial stress hugely impacts recognition. And so we pointed that out, and I think the others are nodding and would agree with that as well. So I guess in terms of where we land with some of the questions that have come through, acknowledging the comments about the scope and the importance of looking at payments, we did have a question for the panel. Any thoughts on carers who haven't been able to accrue any superannuation? Talking about that as one of the costs that Myra's mentioned before. So Myra, did you want to have a go at that first?
Sure. I think it's a really important question, and unfortunately I think it's a neglected question in policy. It's something we've been trying to do some advocacy around. you know, I feel as though policymakers are starting to come on board in a very narrow way by looking at the possibility of adding a superannuation contribution to the parental leave scheme as a way of sort of recognising that, hey, when people have career interruptions associated with care, there are huge impacts for their capacity to accrue superannuation. And so, you know, the government has a role in stepping in there. Unfortunately, you know, there hasn't been as much attention at a policy level to what could be done for carers of a person with a disability or a chronic illness or an older relative. We've done some work around models of providing carer credits to people's superannuation accounts while they're outside of the workforce providing unpaid care, or even if they're in the workforce, but in the workforce part-time. How could the government step in and make contributions to their superannuation accounts while they're providing this really important, valuable activity of unpaid care? And there's lots of interest, you know, like there are lots of organisations, including in the inquiry into economic security and retirement, lots of organisations actually from across the spectrum of organisations coming on board and saying it would be really valuable to do something in the area of carer credits, but we haven't seen any activity yet.
Thanks, Myra. Did anyone else want to comment on superannuation? No, all good. It's a complex area. Thanks for that, Myra. We are running out of time for the session, but we have had a couple of other questions come through, both of which I guess relate to what the inquiry has been doing. So we had a question, were there any submissions on respite? And also, are there any to review Care Gateway? So I think probably the best way to find answers to those questions, Linda, is to have a look at the inquiry website, which I'll get Melissa to put in the chat again for you. I'm sure that there were many submissions that referred to respite and many, in fact, that would focus on respite. Myra's nodding because much of the work we've done with Myra has been around respite. So respite wasn't specifically mentioned in the terms of reference, but obviously as part of a very important part of the carer ecosystem, it's part of the what's being discussed. And the same with Care Gateway. So Care Gateway was raised specifically at a number of the public hearings. So if you'd like to see how that's been discussed and the kinds of questions that have been asked, again, if you go to the inquiry website, that you can look at the transcripts there. There's also recordings of those sessions, and many submissions will have referred to Care Gateway services as part of that bigger picture. So I think that's probably the best way to answer those questions. And Melissa's just posted that link now in the chat, which you can visit. So I think that's all of the questions that have sort of come through from attendees. Feel free to post any last minute questions you had, but I wanted to throw back to our panelists sort of for a bit of a last word, I suppose, based on our conversation today. So I guess if you could choose one, or I might allow you two or maybe three, but let's try for one, key outcomes that you are hoping for from the current inquiry, what would that be? So I might start with Alex.
Thanks, Sarah. I would say like I said in the one of the earlier answers, accountability is always going to be key. To build accountability, it comes from many different outcomes. For example, it just said my internet connection is unstable. Can you still hear me?
We can. You came back.
Cool. You can still hear me? Excellent. Yeah. So for a system to be accountable, of course, there needs to be a body to set the standard and also to impose consequences if those things are not being listened to. But also it stems from having that awareness for carers out there to know that, well, first of all, there's a Carer Recognition Act, but also how they can access redress and who they can go to access that redress as well if things are not being done. So it all comes from being awareness and also having carers who are empowered to engage in advocacy through using their own lived experience. So my simple answer is advocacy, but accountability, but it all links back to having that recognition and empowering carers to use their experiences in advocating.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. Kathy, did you have a final word about what you're hoping for the inquiry to achieve?
Sure, yeah. So on my wish list, so firstly, I'd like to see carers' right to assessment actually specifically included in the legislation as it is in England. I'd also like to see our framework for carer recognition used in aged care programs to ensure services are meeting their obligations, as Alex has said, and as a way of demonstrating what care recognition looks like on the ground for providers. I'd also like to see a genuine commitment by government to implement the Care Recognition Act in policy and programs through developing a national carer strategy with a real budget with dollars specified through the out years attached to agreed outcomes with specific timeframes.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. And last but not least, Myra, what are you hoping for the inquiry to achieve?
I completely agree with Alex and Kathy, actually. I would hope to see better pathways for identifying carers and addressing their needs, and an ideal method of doing that would be through a carer assessment. And I'd also like to see measures that ensure the implementation of the Act across a range of different domains, including care services, but also in workplaces. And as Alex said, that the kind of accountability, the teeth are going to be incredibly important.
Thank you very much. And we are right on 1 o'clock. And I did see a comment there about a Veterans Gold card, Peter. We have been advocating on a carer's card, and very welcome to contact our policy team if you'd like to follow up more on that. But I want to make sure I honour everyone's time today. Thank you for joining us for this lunchtime learning session as part of National Carers Week, which ends tomorrow. And particularly thank you to our panellists, not only for their sharing their perspectives today and for preparing to do that for us, but also for being so active in advocating for carers in a range of settings, and especially in the care recognition inquiry. And if anyone today wants to hear more about that or participate more in that, please do get in touch. Melissa has put our contact in the chat. But it's been really exciting to see government listening to carers and those that work with carers about what to do next. So thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely weekend, and we hope you've had a good Carers Week and feeling recognised as a carer in some domains. And we'll continue to work for improved care recognition through this inquiry. Thanks again.